Welcome to Write Now Workshop Podcast, where you can write a book and change the world. I'm your host, Kitty Bucholtz, and this is episode 133, Breaking All the Rules, an interview with Samuel Parker, coming to you on Thursday, March 21st, 2019. I have to tell you, I did make that title very on purpose as a way to suck you in so that you would listen at least to these first few seconds. Why? Because near the end of the interview, we talk a little bit more about Samuel's process for writing his books. We talk about a lot of really interesting things that I won't rehash for you. It's a really interesting interview. But it's really important for you to know that somebody out there, and not just one person, but Samuel is telling you his story of all the things that he does as a writer that are not according to the rules of writing as we have been told them. So if you are thinking, I don't know, maybe this isn't for me, maybe I'm not a real writer because I don't do it, the way these books say to do it, just give this interview a listen, because I think that you will be encouraged that however you craft your stories, that's the way you do it. And that is the right way for you to do it. Now, if they're not good stories, then there are changes that you are going to have to figure out where to make them. But if you are making good stories the way you do it, if you only write one day a week, or if you don't have an outline, if you do this or don't do that according to some rule that you heard or read in a book, that does not necessarily mean that all else in front of you is failure and you should just give up or conform, because that's not what creativity is about. So I really want to urge you, keep listening to this interview. Everything that we talk about having to do with the book and writing process and, like going to a foreign country to do some research, that was also interesting. But I thought that one of the best parts is just the encouragement that however you do it is okay. And you should keep on doing it. Don't give up. Now, some of you are not thinking that you're going to give up. You're thinking, I have so much to do. How can I get more done or figure out a way to master all of the pieces that I have to do all at once? The marketing, the writing, the editing, the social media. So we don't talk a lot about that, not in this episode, but there's a lot of really great stuff that you learn when you're listening to another writer talk about what they do and how they do it. So I think that no matter where you're at in your writing journey, you are going to find some really interesting things, and it's just fun. It's just fun to listen to writers talk about writing, which is why you listen to the podcast, right? So once again, you are in the right spot, and let's just go ahead and listen to Samuel now. Today's guest is Samuel Parker. Samuel was born in the Michigan boondocks, but was raised on a never-ending road trip through the U.S. Besides writing, he's a process junkie and the ex-guitarist for several metal bands you've never heard of. He lives in West Michigan with his wife and twin sons. Welcome, Samuel.
Thanks. That's very nice to be here.
It is great. I am so excited because you've got to be like 3 out of 4 of the last authors I've been interviewing are from Michigan. I'm from Michigan.
Yeah. There's a lot of us here, and it's a good community.
Yeah. So I don't know if you have a preference, Michigan State Spartans versus U of M Blue.
I don't. My parents are originally from Kansas, so I was raised on a different sports paradigm than most U of M MSU fans here.
Yeah. Well, that's good then, because you have no fights with anyone from Ohio State.
I do not. No. I've heard the stories, though.
Right. It's so funny. My husband and I have traveled to Australia and New Zealand as well for work, and California for work, and now we're in Sweden for work. And what happens? The church that we decide to go to, there's a fellow there who went to Ohio State University, and here we are from Michigan. I'm like, this is like a worldwide phenomenon.
Yeah. If it's going to happen, it's going to happen, right?
That's right. Well, listen, let's talk about your book. At the very moment you and I are talking, it is really brand new. Probably the books are still hot from the press. And by the time that everybody else hears us talking, it will still be out for less than a month. So your new book is called Border Son. And I was about ready to say something about it's a insert genre here. And I thought, you know what? it's different enough from different things that I was going to say that I thought, let me just let you introduce
Well, no,
it.
I'd like to hear what you say. I think it'd be fun to see what you say about it. I
So,
would call it a suspense thriller. It doesn't follow the same kind of template that a lot of thrillers do,
yeah.
where there's nobody in the CIA, there's nobody in any of the three-letter government agencies. There's no police. Well, no, there is a police officer. There is a. Let me take that back. There is a DEA agent, but he's a minor character and not really reputable. Um, so it doesn't have that. It's not you kind of the standard build up crescendo three times and then a big ending. I mean, it doesn't really have that. I'm not really a reader of that type of story. I like different things and more nonlinear type writing, or just point A to point B and let's call it good.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I gravitate towards reading. It really is the type of films I like too. I think both of my previous books have been optioned for film, and
Congratulations.
thank you. And so I was able to help out with the screenwriting process for the first one. And I think my writing translates to script a lot easier because that's just how I think.
Yeah.
I tried to describe it to somebody before how my thought process goes, and it's almost like storyboarding. I think in scenes and almost like a comic panel, and so and then I write to that, and then I just kind of link scene to scene to scene. And so I think if it doesn't really fit into normal thriller type
Yeah.
type mode. So maybe that's why I try to describe it the same way, and you're kind of, around the edges. Like it doesn't really fit in very. It's not so unique that's like, oh, nothing's ever been done like this. But
Yeah.
I don't really follow probably the tried and true formula, which I think works. That's why people do it.
Yeah.
But so a little bit different, and I like different things about stories than probably a lot of writers
Yeah.
go for it. I really like that dramatic scene or that poignant moment. It's almost like I kind of like those parts of film really.
Yeah.
That you ever see that film, The Good and the Bad and the Ugly, the old one with Clint
Yes.
Eastwood? Yeah, and then there's that scene at the end where there's three in this gunfight, and it's not like a whole minute of just them moving their eyes. But it's just so I think of that as like that has got to be the most boring concept. Like okay, we're gonna stand here and stare at each other, but
Yeah.
it is incredibly intense the way it's shot and the way it's told. So that's kind of what I like. I like something simple, but then you just build it up into a lot of intensity.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I liked so much about this book was that it didn't, like you said, there are certain kinds of structures that you see a lot in major genres, and yours was not obviously that structure, but there were so many moments that you were just like, holy cow, I'm just like, if I'm reading, fast because of all the action, like I can feel my brain just sort of pause for a minute and go, whoa, I'm not so much surprised that that happened, but wow, that happened and it happened right now. And like, it just kind of makes me, it's similar to the anticipation and build up that you might get in a film that with music and cuts and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
even though, the gunfighters haven't actually started shooting, there's this intense anticipation that, who is going to be the first one. And
Mm-hmm.
you kind of have that in your writing but with so many scenes, there wasn't like an obvious midpoint that I knew, because sometimes you can just tell, I'm like, this has got to be the midpoint. I'm pretty sure I'm at the middle of the book. Oh, look, yes, I am, you
Mm-hmm.
know?
Yeah, it's the buildup, I think, which makes an interesting story. And my brother was in Afghanistan for a year, and he told me that one time they were out on patrol, and he was behind a wall. His whole group was, and they were getting shot at, and they had to run across this road and down into a ravine, one by one after the other. And I'm thinking that moment of sitting behind that wall, waiting for your turn, must have been the worst moment of just I would have been scared to death.
Yeah.
And he talked about it with that army speak of hoorah and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But I thought the running part your mind would just be blank. You'd be just running. But waiting is the worst, I think. And uh, I think for writing, especially with action sequences, you want to get this, big cinematic boom, explosions and action and stuff like that. But the real tension happens in just waiting for it. Just waiting
Right.
for the action to happen is where the tension is.
Yeah. And I can tell that you, as a writer, really believe that, because there were so many parts where it wasn't like the boring kind of waiting, like when is something going to happen? It was like you just kind of, you draw out what's about ready to happen enough that I'm like, oh my gosh, well, is it going to happen right now? Right now? Next page? Like I'm just like keep hitting the button on the Kindle going,
Yeah,
okay, yes.
yeah, yeah. Well,
Well,
so like in the story where Edward, the main character, he's got to go to Mexico, and he's heard the stories, and it's a foreign country, to him, in all sense and purposes. And it's that time that he's sitting there looking across, saying, I have to walk across, and he's scared. Well, there's a story when I went down to cross the border in New Mexico, and I parked my car and I was going to walk across. I was scared to death. I was scared to death. I was like, because I had heard stories of, you know, the stories.
yeah,
I
yeah.
thought, I want to walk across. I'm going to be in a gunfight. It's going to be anarchy and war. And absolutely nothing happened. It was just, the sun was out. I walked around for about, a while. It was nice. I took pictures. The only unique thing was there was this little dog who looked like a stray. Just started following me around for about a couple blocks. Kept his distance, but he was looking for probably something food or whatever, and that was it. There was no excitement. But I remember that just that waiting because you don't know. I mean, I think that's what suspense is, right? Your suspense
Right.
is you have to act when you don't know what's going to happen. And I mean, if you know what's going to happen, then it's not really suspenseful. Like, I know the person's going to be okay. I think that's why this new type of writing is happening where main characters just die off. You don't know who's going to survive or whatnot.
Yeah.
That's kind of the new thing, right?
Right.
But if you know they're going to be fine, then what's the point? It's not going to be suspenseful. So
Yeah.
I do like that. I think I dwell in that moment the most in my writing is thinking about what people are thinking when they're scared and have to do something.
Yeah. It's funny because John and I lived in Arizona for 7.5 years. And again, you have all these stories in your head, some of which later you start thinking, where did I ever hear that story? I wonder if that's from a movie and not from
Yeah,
real life. But then
exactly.
yeah. But then also there's those real life stories. And then, later, again, you're thinking, wait, is that a 1 in a million real life story? Is this an everyday real life story? But for the whole time that we lived in Arizona and California, we have never been to Mexico because we were always like, we always both kind of laughed that I have some sort of mark on my face that says easy mark.
Yeah.
So it just seems like a bad idea to take me anywhere that, could possibly be the wrong place for me.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the problems with stories is you only hear certain stories. You don't
Yeah.
hear the full spectrum of the community and the culture and stuff. You really have to take your time. It's you we get it in sound bites, right? We get the news feeds and the Facebook stories and all this stuff. Um, so to really understand though, you have to read deeper. You have to realize what the culture is like, the communities are like. Even on the north side of the border, the communities in the U.S. are just really unique and vibrant and interesting. There's I think it's a great place of the country to write with unique characters. Because
Interesting.
there's a lot of eccentric people uh, far away from the cities.
Right. That
So
does make sense.
yeah, so it's they're either eccentric because they live away from a lot of people, or they live apart from people because they're eccentric. I don't know what comes first, but so
Right.
yeah, you meet some really interesting people and interesting. I love driving around the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico. just start drive around and the ideas just start coming, flowing.
It's so funny because everybody has their place that they tend to write in. You know, Stephen King writes in Maine. I
Mm-hmm.
maybe because I miss Michigan, I write in Michigan. Maybe just because I spent my entire formative, 5 to 25, life there. That's my place. But so I think it's a little bit funny to me as a Michigan person that another Michigan person finds the desert so interesting.
Yeah,
When I was like, how long until I get to leave this desert?
yeah. I don't have to live there. I
Yeah.
just get to pass through. I travel a lot for work, so I get it in small doses. But my second book though took place in the woods, right? So that's kind of Michigan, and people ask me, well, where is it? I'm like, it's the woods, and like,
Yeah.
yeah, but like Michigan or West Virginia, I'm like, just the woods, you know. The woods are the same. You go into the woods, It's like my kids are the same way. We're gonna go out and play. Where you going? The woods.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And
my
it's
second
funny.
book was kind of my second book was kind of not really placed in a specific real location.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love the desert. Go ahead.
No, I was going to ask you about that. So, two of your three books that are currently out, as of March 2019, anyway, for people listening later, are set in the desert. And your press release had some pieces in it, questions about your interest or fascination with the desert. Let's kind of backtrack just a little bit and give readers an idea, or sorry, listeners. I always do that. Give listeners an idea of what Border Sun is about, because we didn't really tell them the plot very well there, and then tell us a little bit about, as a writer, how you ended up choosing this place, and because other people might be thinking, oh, yeah, you know what, I never thought about this is the place that I is kind of my go-to place when I'm setting a story, or maybe it's not, but yeah, let's talk about your view of it.
Well, Border Son is like a retelling of a prodigal son story, where a Midwestern father who hasn't seen his son for years all of a sudden discovers that he's in a lot of trouble in Mexico, and then decides through circumstances that he's got to go down and help him come back to the U.S. And he can't, because of the trouble his son is in, can't just go down, pick him up in a car, and come through customs. So he's got to find a different way back back home. And then the group that his son is messed up with, obviously is looking for him. He's done some bad things and whatnot. So there's the thrill, there's the suspense of it. But it really is a kind of a father-son, but parent-son, because there's a Mexican-American family, which is a single mom, and her adult son who's in trouble too. So it is a kind of a parent-son story. Having been a son and am a son to my parents, and I have twin boys who are 12, so I was
Oh,
able to kind of, you know, I'm in that phase of life where you both want to throttle them and also protect them, you know.
yeah.
Um, but then the idea is like, what happens if one of these kids does something really bad, and how are we going to react? I thought that was a nice question to explore.
Yeah.
Um, and so it takes place in fictional towns. One's Hurtado, New Mexico, which is named after it's actually named after a Mexican gunslinger. Um, and then a place called Nuevo Nagaldo, which sounds a little bit like Nogales, and Nuevo Laredo. Uh, but these are based off of Columbus, New Mexico, and Puerto Palomas, which is right on the south side of the border from Columbus. Small little town. I think it's one of the smallest border crossing areas of the.
Wow.
I think there's 11 of them. Yeah. So I was able to go out there and kind of experience it, and then use that as the environment to kind of build out my place. And I love the desert. I think because I love spaghetti westerns. And I think it's just as simple as that. I love them all. I've already mentioned the good and the bad and the ugly. I'd mention all of them because I love that scene. I love the movie No Country for Old Men by Cormac McCarthy, which took place in a desert somewhere. I think the Chihuahuan Desert.
Yeah.
Um, I love that. When I see a movie coming out about the desert, I'm like, yep, I'm gonna go see it.
Awesome.
So,
So
but
then what was it like? I mean, you said that you had an expectation that it would be sort of scary and the anticipation that it would be
mhm.
scary and then nothing happened. But so you have all of these movies in your head and now you're going to do this. I honestly do not think that I knew that you could walk across the border. But I mean, what do you say? I'm an author, I'm just here doing research, or I'm just an American with no really good reason for being in such a tiny town, or
Yeah. So well, yeah. So yeah, there's a parking lot on the American side, and it was
really?
yeah. This was a small crossing. So if you cross in El Paso into Juarez, it's massive. It's I don't know how many lanes of highway, and there are bridges to walk. There's a lot of people walking back and forth for who live in Juarez and work in El Paso, and go back home. But this one was small. It was a 2-lane road with like a metal awning over it, that people would drive in either north or south. I parked the car. I sat in the car for a while, watched some people walk across, and like, oh, I can do this. Um, and I walked across, and nobody noticed. I walked right in. I walked past two of the Mexican, I think, military personnel who were standing there with machine guns, and they were just talking to each other. And I just walked right in, walked down the street, took some pictures of the park, went to by a couple churches that I wanted to see, and uh, did some touristy shopping stuff. And coming back was a totally different. Coming back was much more intense as far as because I had some stuff with me that I had accumulated there, and all the questions: how long are you here? What's in the bag? The dog walking around smelling stuff. you know, it was much more nerve wracking.
Wow. But
And
to go in, you don't have to show papers or a passport, nothing?
you might. I don't know. On that day, I didn't have to. I just went right in.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, maybe I broke several international laws that day and had no idea. Totally oblivious to it.
Well, the guy with the gun didn't stop you, so.
Oh, just the clueless American walking around.
Yeah.
We're not really known to be too observant of our surroundings.
So,
But,
so while you were walking around, like as a writer, are you taking pictures? That's a normal pastime for
Yeah.
any tourist. But
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, like, were you like doing any kind of voice recording to like remember this, use this, or making any notes, or you're like, no, I'm just going to wait till I get back?
Well, I tried that on my previous book. I tried to do the voice recording, and hopefully this recording you're doing now comes out fine. I have a problem of being very lazy in my speech and not enunciating very well and just kind of mumbling. And so I would listen back. I'm like, I have no clue what I'm saying.
You can't even understand yourself.
Yeah, and then on tape, and then I would try to do the voice to text thing on my phone. I tried that, and it couldn't even understand. It was like this makes no sense. So and I've been told too that I mumble a lot and whatnot from my wife. Tells me all the time. So no, what I think what I do is just kind of take it in like osmosis. I think I just you're not really looking for specific. Oh, I'm not. I don't need to describe the stain of the rust on the wall or the knots in the wood. I mean, that's not. You've read my book. It's not really kind of my thing. I like it. The description should be a feeling in my mind. So the sound of your steps. Because it's the desert is it's an empty space, so sound just sounds different, and the smells and the noises you hear, just the heat, the the feeling that you get. That's what I try to. When I say I do research, that's a lot of what it is. Just the feeling. What's the feeling of the environment, and rather than describing it.
Yeah.
That might fall into that show don't tell or tell don't show. I don't know. I hear that a lot. And I'm like, I don't even know what that means.
I just write the way I write.
Just write the way I write. Yeah.
Well, it's funny. Until you said it, I hadn't really. I mean, which is good. The fact that I wasn't analyzing your book meant that I was reading it and enjoying it. So this
Hmm.
is good. But until you said it, I don't think that I really realized that you didn't describe anything, because I'm like, no, it's totally visually. Oh no, no, it was totally emotional, and I
Yeah,
filled in what seemed scary in my head or beautiful in my
yeah,
head.
exactly. I think,
Interesting.
have as a reader too, and studied literature and stuff in school. I think the best, or the fiction that resonates with me, is the one where the writer takes you up as far as they have to, and then your imagination fills in the rest, because then your mind is working
Yeah.
and filling it in, and then you become invested in it, and
Yeah.
and you can Google pictures and see what a place looks like, and but I can tell you, it's like, um, let's go back to my second book we were talking about. It's like, picture the woods. You already have a picture of the woods in your head. I don't have to describe what my picture is. I
Right.
just have to say they were in the woods, and you already have a vision of it.
Yeah.
And I think, and then you can get to the story, and not really get bogged down in the writing. I see a lot of, of early writings of people who, it's all about too much detail. It's like, I don't need to know. I know what a hotel along the highway looks like, and I know what, you know, everybody would like to have a diner in their story. I have a diner in most of my stories. Everybody knows what a diner is. That's like, you don't need to describe it in detail. So, to me,
Yeah.
that, in my opinion, and the way I like to write and read, that to me that slows it down.
Yeah.
Slows it down a lot. So you just kind of, uh, dialogue, dialogue, and movement is kind of what I resonate towards.
Nice. Yeah, because now you got me thinking. I remember the first time that I read something that had the word California oak, and I'm like, we have oaks in Michigan. What's a California oak? Is it different? And it stops me. It makes me think,
It
oh,
does.
maybe these people aren't the same as me because this tree is different from me. These aren't my
Yeah.
woods, so
Yeah.
this is not my story, or something like that, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because now you're out of the story.
Yeah.
Anything that trips you up to get you out of the story is, then you got to think, as a writer, you're giving the reader, an out.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're giving them a reason not to continue, because
Right.
now they're thinking about something other than the story. It's like what you said.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you've ever read any of the Robert Parker, novels.
I haven't. I see them and I read the back
Mhm.
cover and I wonder whether or not I would like them.
They're very quick, but he wrote a Western series that is almost all dialogue. And it's not
Really?
stilted dialogue. It's all, yup, okay, yup. But it's, you're, by the end, you're like, I totally am involved with these guys. But he's very quick. He's a very lean writer.
Yeah.
He produced a lot. I mean, he was churning out the books every little bit.
Yeah.
So it's not deep writing, but it's a good example of how a writer can write very quickly, get a lot of story in, and really go for the emotional, connection, rather than just a complete, uh, sensory one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your writing process. So,
Hmm.
you've got 3 books out right now, plus, however much more. We'll talk about what you're working on next as
Hmm.
well, or what you're currently working on, I should say. But however you want to describe it, what's your writing day look like, or how do you approach starting your story, working through the first draft, or?
Um, I have it, this is going to be, probably, don't do this, kids,
Okay.
because I don't have a schedule. I don't have a word count per day. Um, I don't write every day. I have a full time job other than writing, and so writing to me is, I pursued it as a job at one point in my life, and I didn't enjoy it as work, and so for me, I needed this part of my life to be something I did because I loved it. Does that make sense? And
Yeah, totally.
I'm not trying to discount anybody who does it for a living or aspires to. I mean, I'm good. I think that's a noble thing to try. But for me personally, I needed to not kind of transform it into something other than just pure, I love to do it. I needed
Yeah.
that space in my life. Um, so I write, when I do get down to it. I write, usually on my lunch hour in my car. at the park.
Yeah.
I have a like a micro little computer that doesn't connect to the world at all. It's just basically a word processor, so I don't get
Nice.
distracted. Uh, and so I'll sit there, and I can usually uh, most of my chapters are pretty short, as you noticed. If we want to talk word counts, around between 750 and maybe 1,200 words,
Yeah.
and it's usually kind of a writing session for me. Um, it's not final. But I can. It's a scene. I can usually write a scene at each lunch, or if
Yeah.
not, I'll finish it up before I go to bed that night. And then most of my writing is just thinking. I just think it out, and by the time I get down to write it, I kind of flushed it all out.
Yeah.
But I'll be driving around, and I'll have the characters in the scene, and I'm talking to myself in the car back and forth, trying to find the right word, the cadence. Um, I, as you said in my bio, I used to play in bands, and we used to write songs. So horrible songs, by the way. We won't get into that, but just. But anyway, what I'm getting at is writing lyrics to music is all about how it overlays the beat and the melody and the phrasing. It's all about phrasing, to
Yeah.
make it unique. And so I kind of try to think of that with dialogue is what's some good phrasing that's natural, and most people speak in fragments, not complete sentences.
Yeah.
There's my one piece of writing advice: don't do dialogue with complete sentences. People don't talk that way. But yeah, fragments and utterances, and people communicate a lot of different ways than speech.
Yeah.
So I'll have those dialogues in my head for days, and try to find the right words that these people can say to each other. And then when I get, oh, that's it. Then I write it. Then I start writing it down.
I like it. You know,
So
and even though I understand why you said these are probably the things you shouldn't do, but honestly, there are people listening who I want them to feel encouraged that yes, you can not write every day and not have a word count and have a full-time job or some other full-time pursuit that you have to or for whatever reason are pursuing, like it could be parenthood or something like that, or
mhm.
taking care of parents or something. And you can produce books and
Yeah,
get the books done well enough. You were, let's see, was it book one was one of Library Journal's best books of 2017 for your first book.
I know that was I was believe me, I was just as surprised as what you look right now. I'm like, yeah, wow. We celebrated that one for a good while, and yeah, it was great. It was when your first stuff gets out there, you just hope and pray that somebody resonates with it, even
Yeah.
if it's a small group of people, and so that was really exciting to see that, and slowly and surely over the past couple of years, slowly finding people who resonate with writing and love the books and are looking forward to the next ones. And it's a slow build. It's a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And
Right.
you really do have to find each reader one at a time, because uh, my own reading habits. If I think about mine, I jump from book to book, genre to genre. I don't read exclusively one type of book nonstop.
Right.
And so it's like somebody says, "Well, I have a new thriller out. You want to check it out?" We're like, "Well, I'm kind of in my Western phase right now, or I'm in my sci-fi phase." It's like, it looks interesting. I want to get to it, but I'm over here now. At least for a
Yeah.
month, I'll drift back.
Yeah.
And that's how everybody is, I think,
Yeah.
who are readers. So it's easy to get discouraging when the pace is a lot slower than what you hope for, as far as finding readers and stuff. But it's a slow burn. And so,
Yeah.
um,
But that circles back around to the other thing you said was that you needed and wanted this to be the thing that you continued to love. And
yes,
so it has pros and cons to it, but at least you're
uh,
still in the place where you love what you do, right?
oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, I think um, again, not disparaging anybody who does a different mode of life than me at all. But for me, if I had the worry of paying like rent,
Yeah.
waiting for the book sales to really peak, it would be too stressful to the point that I couldn't write. I would
Yeah.
be focused on other things. And stressed out. Yeah, and I didn't need that. So 10 years ago, I tried to jump in that way, and it just didn't work for me.
Yeah.
It didn't work for me. It works for other people. That's great, but it just did not work for me.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't always like to talk about all the things that I quote unquote fail in, but I think that it's important to be, or at least for me, this is my podcast and my rules. So for me, my rule is I try to be as transparent as possible because I don't want people to think, oh, since I can't do it the way that Kitty did it, and she's so obviously successful at A or B or C, then I
Mm-hmm.
probably shouldn't do it. So my listeners know that I tried to tell them what's really going on in my life, and I did that. I pursued it all out. Like I worked all around the clock, and I got 4 books to medium, long short stories. Nobody calls them novelettes. Readers don't call them that. That's the
Yeah.
quote correct word count and name. But anyway, so 8 titles out, wasn't making a living, and exhausted myself. Literally, finally figured out that the word for how I was feeling was burnout, and I
Mm-hmm.
didn't write for over a year.
Yeah.
So the whole thing was totally not working for me. I actually got a full-time job to take off the pressures of life so
Mm-hmm.
that then I could come back to writing exactly what you're saying. Like now I can go back to it because I love it and not
Mm-hmm.
because, holy crap, how am I going to earn enough money to whatever?
Yeah, exactly. It reminded me, I had to relearn this. I had learned this once in my life already. Um, when I was playing it in music and bands, very low level, but I loved writing songs in like the practice rooms. I hated being on stage. I just did not like
Really?
that. I am not that personality. And the guys I was with, they were, and they loved it, and they were great. They were awesome musicians, and a lot of them went on to pursue that line of work. That was not me. I loved creating. I hated being in front of people, and
Yeah.
so I forgot that aspect of who I am when I tried to jump into writing. And it's like, no, I'm not comfortable there. I don't mind writing and having it produced and then having it find its way in the market.
Yeah.
I'm not good at trying to stand up in front of people and say buy my book. That's
Yeah.
just not my personality type. So
Yeah.
I learned that twice in my life now. So
Right.
hopefully I
Right.
got it. Hopefully
Yeah.
I got it now.
Well, now you're making me, I have to ask the question, since you were a songwriter and that was what you were good at and it went along with your personality, did you keep that up for a little while after you stopped performing?
Yeah, yeah. I not now you threw in something that probably I'm not qualified. I don't know if I was good at
Oh,
it.
I
I
guess I
you know,
can hear that.
I
Yeah.
won't say that. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed it. Of course I was 19, 20. That's what every 20-year-old,
That's right.
kid does. Uh, so I liked creating. And before that, in elementary school and junior high and high school, I wrote short stories. I like that. I like the process. I like
Yeah.
creating stuff. And hopefully creating something that people like. But ultimately, I like the process. I like doing it.
Yeah.
Um, and that's why, for me, making it as a sole point of trying to monetize it as a sole stream of my income is just
Yeah.
does not work for me.
Yeah.
I want to keep loving it, like you said. I want to love doing it.
Yeah. All right. Well, now I kind of feel like I need to ask you a hard question. So
Yep.
for listeners who are more like you,
Mm-hmm.
like what would you tell yourself 5 or 10 years ago or whatever? Like what advice would you give to someone who is more your personality, more your place in life? They've got a job or something, and something that helps them to keep going, don't give up, don't worry about all those rules that you hear if they don't work for you, or I don't know, what would your advice be to you?
I the advice that I learned that I don't know if people will take it as advice or if they have to learn it themselves is that whole you got to write in your own voice thing, which um, I know a lot of people have talked about, but you start with imitation. You imitate who you like, and as soon as you can kind of get out of that and write exactly how you hear it in your head, or even speak it, that's where your voice is found, the way that you tell the story. Because it's not so much the story. Almost every story has already been told.
Yeah.
You know, so if you think, okay, it's not the story, it's the telling of the story that's unique. You know, it's the way it's told uh, that makes you different from another writer, because it's the structure is going to probably be the same. And so you got to, that's what you have to find. And you find that not by imitating, and then also not by self doubt and self talk, because our voice is boring to ourselves.
Yeah.
It's the one that we hear all the time. It's like, okay. Um,
Good point.
and so what I found with my first published novel, which I wrote, it was published 2 years ago, but I wrote it 10 years ago.
Oh, wow.
Um, was that was the first one that I just kind of just wrote the story and not tried to make it like something else that I admired. And when I started passing out the sample chapters, it really started getting some buzz from people who thought that there was something there.
Wow.
And that was my first feedback. So I think back at that, it's like, those are the things I wish I would have learned earlier. Is don't doubt the voice that you have in your head telling you what the story is.
Yeah.
That's the only unique part that you bring to the equation.
That's a good point. Oh man. Well, I have to say, I really like the unique part that you bring to the equation. I like suspense and thrillers. I like stuff that is not so gruesome that all I see is the gruesomeness, but like the reality of your story was, I edited it in my head to be PG-13 because I'm like, okay, dead body, yes, I don't want to think about what it actually. Yeah. But it was so vivid, and now talking to you how much I realize of my emotion, that the emotion that was in the book that I was reading and then became my emotion as the reader. I'm like, okay, that is so interesting, because it helps me to understand, like, why did your book work in a way that was so different from most of the suspense books that I'm reading right now? Yeah.
If you're curious, I write to music a lot in my car. So I'll write scenes to specific songs. So, and I'll listen to the song a lot of times to get that kind of emotional, what you get out of a particular song. And so I have soundtracks to my books, all on my Spotify account. It's like, here's
cool.
chapter 1, here's chapter 2, here's chapter 3, and I don't share that with people, because I think then that ruins their experience. But because that's what you get out of music. You get an emotional response and a little bit of catharsis that way. And so I think that's probably is what bleeds through a little bit.
Nice. I like it. Okay, well, listen, so we've got, I just have to look at my notes to get the titles right. Purgatory Road, set in the desert and had supernatural elements, right?
It did.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then Cold Water, set in the woods.
In the woods. Somewhere in the woods.
It's so funny though, because I grew up in the woods, and that's the way I say it. And then I talk to other people maybe who've only lived in the city their whole lives, and I realize that they probably have no idea what I mean when I just say I grew up in the woods. I'm like, no, I wasn't raised by wolves. I'm saying my house was surrounded by trees.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then Border Sun, set in the Mexican and American desert, and I hesitate to say anything because I just finished reading the book. I read the last page like 45 minutes before we started. I was like, I have to know what happens, even though I can't talk about it. And that was one of the other things I wanted to compliment you on. I love the kind of the James Patterson super short chapters, in a million of them. So I feel like the pace is fast, and I can get through things really fast. And also, I don't have to worry about having to stop in the middle of something if I'm, on the train or at my lunch hour.
I think when you're writing, you also have to think of the psychology of the reader too, and what you're competing with. You're competing with apps and games that are just insta games, right? And so attention spans are getting shorter, and that does that change the way you tell a story? I don't know. Maybe it does. I hate it when it's 11 o'clock at night. I'm supposed to be sleeping, you want to get rid of to the end of a chapter in the book, and you're like, I got 30 pages to go.
Yes.
It's like mine at most you'll have a half page.
Yeah. In fact, let me think. Because I was reading it while I was walking to the train and then home reading. I'm like reading on my Kindle the whole time. I'm like, I have to know before I talk to you how it ends. And then I was like, okay, I have 30 minutes. I'm just going to lay down on the couch and get all really comfortable. And it says I have 16 minutes left. And it turned out I had like 6 pages left, and there was a chapter of the next book at the end. I'm like, okay, well, there we go. But at least I know what happened.
Now you know what happened. And are you glad that what happened the way it happened?
Yes, because I like being surprised. And the thing about, okay, here's the thing to me. What some people call formula, and I like to call structure, because formula just has such a bad, people have given it a bad connotation. Structure is structure because it works. Like everybody who's a human has the same kind of skeleton because this skeleton works for us.
Yes, exactly.
Now granted, some people are born without an arm or missing some fingers, and so their skeleton is slightly different. But what I found so interesting was that somehow you managed to keep surprising me in a way that, like, I knew basically there are 2 choices. Will so-and-so live or die? Will they come home or not come home? Will they do this or that? So yes, I mean, can't be that surprised, but still I would be reading, and right up until the moment I find out what happened, I literally can see it going both ways, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So,
We, all 3 books, we have, I wouldn't say fought, that's too hard of a word, but on the ending. Every one of my books has a different ending that I had to redo. So there's multiple endings out there for these books.
interesting.
Some that I like better, some that made it, the one that I liked made it in. And we went probably 2 weeks on the ending of Border Sun, going back. Do we do A or do we do B? What do we do? And then some days like A sounds good. Nope, I think B is the right thing. It's just like that took a long time, because you want that to be surprised, and I want things to be end in a slightly unique way or different way. And,
Yeah.
to me, that's the hardest part, is ending the story.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so I'm a classic American. I like a closed loop story. The first time that I moved to Australia and watched an Australian film in the movie theater, I was just sitting there with this dumbfounded, confused look on my face when the credits rolled, because I was like, but what happened? Like, the movie's not over. They run out of film?
Yeah, exactly.
So, the interesting thing to me about Border Sun was that the second to last page, I was like, oh, is this how it's going to end? And then the last page, I was still surprised, but you didn't say that the second to last page and the last page were a cause and effect. And yet I got to choose. I got to choose whether or not, I thought they were related.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
good. It worked exactly. Woo! That's what I was going for. It's like, yeah, good. I'm glad. I can't say exactly what happened. I'm trying to.
Right. I'm trying not to either.
Yeah. But no, I'm glad that you had that response, because that was the goal. The goal was to have that kind of response where you have an ending that's a little bit, makes you think a little more than just, oh, feels good, done, move on. Hopefully it just, the ideas are just kind of rattling a little bit further down the road.
Yeah.
When you're thinking about the book, and so
Yeah.
that was what I was hoping for, and I'm glad it worked for you.
Awesome. Listen, this is so fun. I could always just keep on talking to writers about writing and stuff, but we probably should start telling readers a little bit like, what's the next book? What can they expect? And then we'll find out, where can they find all of your books, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So what are you working on right now?
Well, as I would have a response 2 months ago, and that I just decided to put to bed. It just was not really working. I was about halfway through, and just wasn't. I was not interested in it. So I thought, if I'm not interested in it, nobody's going to be. And so I've been kicking around several ideas, and I think one of them is starting to kind of come around to where. So I guess I have nothing to say as far as what's
Not
next.
yet.
I don't really know, but something will percolate.
Does it have the desert yet? Do you know if the desert will be involved?
No, I'm probably back in the woods.
Okay, good.
Or maybe the swamp. I don't know. I haven't done the
No.
swamp, but
That's right. There are some pretty scary things in the swamp.
Yeah, swamp stuff.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Well, why don't you let everybody know, where can people find you, your books, anything about you?
Well, I think the easiest entry point is samuelparkerbooks.com. That has all the links to everything else. I'm on Facebook, and I have accounts on like Twitter and Instagram, but I'm too old to start learning how to do that. I've never Instagrammed my life. I don't think I need to start now, but I do have an account out there they told me to set up. So yeah, Facebook or the website is the easiest to
Awesome.
get in touch. And my email is on there.
Cool. And I think your books are available in ebook, print, audio.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
the audio is for Border Sun. There's a sample on a link to the sample on my Facebook. And Will Dameron is the narrator for that book. He is an audio award winner. His voice is fantastic for the story. So now that you've read it, I suggest you go look up that link. It's just the first chapter, but you hear his voice like, oh, this is perfect.
Oh, I got to go listen. Yeah.
I'm waiting to get a copy in to my desk from the audiobook publisher, because I'm like, I want to listen to this thing. This is the voice that I wish was in my head.
Nice.
So it's beautifully done. So I'm really looking forward to listening to that.
Nice. And there's a possibility that there might be one or more movies coming out in the future, maybe?
Oh, yeah, that's a completely different world. That could take years or never. My first book is further along. It's the screenplay is done, or at least enough to pitch for. It's all about money, more money. More money than I'll ever see,
Yeah.
And these people are talking about these amounts like it's no big deal, I just need a couple million over here, a couple 100,000 over. I'm like, good luck.
Yeah.
So it's all about what people want to invest in to produce, and so we'll have to see. It's it'd be really interesting to see it up on a screen. I'm sure that's every writer's dream to see it on screen. But if it happens, it happens.
Yeah, it'll be fun if it does.
Yeah. I'm not going to say no, don't do it.
Yeah, exactly.
I refuse. Please don't direct my movie. If it happens, it happens.
Samuel, this has been great fun. I've been having a great time listening to you laugh. You've got a great laugh, and hanging out, talking about woods, and knowing that the person on the other side of the screen knows what I mean.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being on the show with us.
No, thank you very much. It's been great talking.